Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jessie Raposo, and I'm a Senior Operations Researcher and Program Director in RAND's Homeland Security Research Division. I want to begin by thanking you all for tuning in to today's demonstration of the Recovery Tracking Tool. We're incredibly proud of the work that went into building this easy-to-use tool, and our goal today is to show you how it can be used to improve transparency and accountability of disaster recovery efforts. I also want to take a moment to introduce RAND's Homeland Security Research Division. In case this is your first experience with us, for nearly a decade, HSRD, as we call it, has served as the focal point for RAND's comprehensive disaster management activities. A large portion of our work addresses the urgent reality that the United States faces larger and more expensive disasters more frequently, and we explore the best ways for communities to prepare for, respond to, recover from, and mitigate the future impacts of disasters of all types. We strive to bring critical analytic capabilities to emergency managers and state and local governments through a few different areas of expertise. One of those areas is on full display today, developing new methods and innovative tools to support a stronger, more efficient disaster recovery process. The recovery tracking tool that we're going to demonstrate today reflects insights gained from nearly a decade of RAND's work supporting large-scale disaster recovery efforts around the United States and in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. While the data we'll use in the demonstration tool is hypothetical, it is built on the real experiences and trends we've identified over the years. We will reserve time at the end today to engage in a Q&A. Please drop your questions into the Q&A chat feature on Zoom. I'll rejoin the conversation to moderate the discussion with Kyle and Devin. And with that, let me introduce our presenters today. Kyle Seiler-Evans and Devin Tierney. Kyle is a senior engineer at RAND who focuses on disaster management, cost analysis, and infrastructure planning and resilience. He has been an integral part of RAND's efforts supporting Puerto Rico's recovery from Hurricanes Irma and Maria. Devin is a research programmer with RAND's Data Science and Technology Group, where he also focuses on disaster recovery, infrastructure resilience, and cost analysis. He has spearheaded the development of the recovery tracking tool you will see today. With that, I will turn it over to Kyle so we can get started. Kyle, over to you.
Thank you, Jessie, and thanks for everyone for taking some time out of your busy days to join us here. So I want to start by describing the problem that we are trying to solve with this recovery tracking tool. I think many of you in the audience have firsthand experience with this, and you know that managing large-scale disasters is just super hard. They are big, messy, complex. They take a long time, years, sometimes even decades, and over that time period, you can have multiple changeovers in leadership. You've got dozens, maybe even hundreds of applicants who are the entities who are then managing thousands, possibly tens of thousands of individual projects. If you're involved in a large recovery effort, you are likely juggling multiple funding sources. These funding sources often have different rules and requirements for how they can be used. They might be managed by different agencies. And to the extent that you have data and tools to have visibility on those funding sources, they're often separate and distinct. And so the result of this is that it can be very difficult to get a comprehensive view of the status and progress of a recovery effort. The thesis of all of our work here is that without good visibility on your recovery, you're more likely to have inefficiencies as you go forward, and you're more likely to make bad decisions. So that is where the recovery tracking tool comes in. That's the problem that we're trying to solve. Our overarching goal here is to help state and local jurisdictions better manage recovery efforts by giving decision makers, and I think there are many of you in the audience today, by giving you all a comprehensive view and actionable insights into the recovery efforts that you all are managing. So what does this tool get you? We think it provides better visibility on your funding sources and how they're allocated. It allows you to do sector-specific deep dives. You can use it to support strategic planning efforts. You can use it to add transparency and enforce some accountability. And then you can use it to provide a range of detailed reporting features. But we think the overall value add, the sort of key feature I want to emphasize here, and we'll come back to it again and again throughout the demo, is that this recovery tracking tool helps you see the whole picture. So the top level billion-dollar view down to individual projects. So regardless if you're the governor and you want to track your recovery at a very high level, or you're a project manager and you only care about the 6 projects that you're responsible for, we think this tool offers useful and valuable and actionable insights across that spectrum. Before I go further, let me define a couple of terms we're going to be using today. Applicant, we use this to refer to anyone who's receiving FEMA funds to rebuild after disaster. These can also be known as recipient or subrecipient, but we're going to use applicant as the general term. Project and damage, I think, are best illustrated through an example. So consider a university campus that gets damaged in a hurricane. That university might get one grant to cover all of the work on that campus. So what we're showing today, that's going to be one project. It's the work paid for by an individual grant. Within that grant, however, and within that university campus, you might have damage to multiple buildings, parking lots, sports stadium. And when you actually go to do the work, you will likely bid those separately, manage those separately. And so it's a one grain finer resolution than project. And it's very common that you'll have multiple damages within a project. That distinction will come up a few times as we go forward in this. Next, we've got our funding sources. Today, we're primarily going to be talking about public assistance. I'm sure most of you know this is one of FEMA's large grant programs, and then Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, or HMGP, we'll also talk about. This tool can incorporate many other funding sources. It's quite flexible, but for today's purposes, we're going to keep it simple, focus largely on these two. So Jesse mentioned we're going to use a scenario based on dummy data to illustrate the use of the tool. So for this scenario, we're considering Pennsylvania as the location for the disaster, totally arbitrary, based on nothing more than Devin lives in Pennsylvania and he did a bunch of the work on this. In this hypothetical disaster, it's $1.25 billion of obligated recovery funds, 10,000 projects, 24,000 damages. And so even though this is dummy data, everything we're showing you today, I want to emphasize that the patterns, the trends, the insights that we're going to be showing are very realistic and they're representative of what we've seen from years working in this area. So before I turn it over to Devin, when we're going to do real-time demonstration of the tool, I want to get you oriented to the key views or dashboards that we're going to show you. 3 in particular we're going to focus on today: public assistance project dashboard, public assistance damage dashboard, and what I call our scenario dashboard, which is more forward-looking, thinking about how is the recovery going to play out going forward. We've also got dashboards on the HMGP program, as well as HUD's Community Development Block Grant Program. We likely won't get into that today. So here's our first view, and let me just acknowledge up front, no one in the audience can read the fine print there. Don't worry, I'm going to do a zoom in just a second. But this is our public assistance project dashboard. So to get you oriented to start, and I'm going to try to, if you can follow my cursor here. So I'm going to highlight the map in the upper left-hand corner. That's a map of Pennsylvania, obviously, by county, and the colors correspond to the total obligations for applicants within those counties. Next, I want to highlight this graph, which is cumulative disbursements and obligations. We think this is one of the most useful and intuitive ways to track the progress of a recovery. So you're going to see some version of this graph multiple times throughout this webinar. On the y-axis, we've got dollar values. On the x-axis, we've got time and years. The turquoise or teal line is your cumulative obligations, and the orange line is your cumulative disbursements. So the way to think about this is turquoise is how much money you've got to work with, and the orange line is how much of that have you executed on to actually complete the work. And the gap between those two lines is a nice indication of how much work you have to go before this recovery is complete. Next, we'll zoom in on our applicant table. And so here we've organized all of the applicants. Notice we're using just generic names. We've organized them by total dollar values obligated, and in the right-hand column, you've got the percent dispersed. Finally, on the right-hand side is our filters and controls. So this is how you use the tool to drill down on key things that you care about. So I'm going to start at the top. You can adjust the time period that you're interested in. Notice you've got a slider bar here, so you can pull that left or right to look at different time periods. Right now, the map of Pennsylvania is color coordinated based on cumulative obligations, but you could use this drop down to select disbursements or a number of other metrics. From there, we get to our filters. If you're managing multiple disasters, you could filter by disaster name, municipality or county, filter by sector, permanent versus emergency work, public assistance category of work, applicant type, applicant name, project size, on down the list. So you can start to see how through these filters, you can narrow in on different aspects of the recovery based on your needs and interests. Next, we're going to move to the damages dashboard. And let me just restate the distinction between projects and damages. So if you remember from the university example, a university campus might receive one grant, that's one project. But within that, if you've got multiple buildings, parking lots, sports stadium, there might be half a dozen different damages that will be repaired as part of that grant. So let me zoom in to start with on the two maps in our damage dashboard. The top one gives you total obligations for damages within a given county, and the bottom one is a count. So top one is in dollars, bottom one is in a simple count of number of damages. And then we've got our table view where you can track by applicant, what are the projects that they have, and what are the damages within those projects. And then what are the dollar values in terms of both obligations and disbursements associated with each of those damages. The stacked bar chart, I think, is one of the most useful views that this tool offers. And so to get you oriented, we've got number of damages across the y-axis. In this case, roughly 24,000 for this hypothetical disaster. Across the x-axis, we've got time, and in this case, we're going from the fourth quarter of 2021 to the first quarter of 2025. And the colors correspond to what stage in the process is this particular damage at. And so it starts with pre-obligation in light yellow. After that, the applicant then has their money and they're ready to start in on planning. That's the next step. Design, permitting, construction, and ultimately the damage should be complete. So all 24,000 damages have to work through these half dozen steps and ideally move from yellow to green, to dark green, before this disaster recovery is complete. The general pattern that I'm showing here is roughly what you want to see. So early in a disaster, on the left-hand side of this graph, you're going to see much more yellow. Those are the early steps in the process. And as time goes on, you want to see more and more projects moving through the steps, design, permitting, construction, and ultimately all of these should be dark green by the end of the recovery. But the general pattern we see here is kind of what you want to see. It's not always this clean and pretty, and we'll show you an example when we get to the demo where projects end up going back and forth between the steps. Okay, last dashboard I want to get you oriented to. This is our scenario dashboard. Unlike the last two, this is forward-looking. So we're now thinking about how is this recovery going to play out in the coming years. I want to zoom in on this graph. We've got dollars on the y-axis, time on the x-axis, and we're showing cumulative obligations in the teal or turquoise color and cumulative disbursements in the orange color. The gray line shows how much money of that initially obligated recovery funds, how much money is lost to inflation. And you'll notice if you have a slow recovery that doesn't finish, starts in 2018, doesn't finish until 2039, you're going to lose a lot of money to inflation. And we'll come back and talk about the implications of that in a minute. But of course, these future projections depend on a couple of key assumptions. And so this tool lets you adjust those. So first, and probably the most important, is what's your timeline or what's your target date for completing the recovery? We've got a slider bar. You could pull this left or right and explore different scenarios there. Second is, what do we think inflation is going to be going forward from now until you finish up the recovery, hitting that target date? Third, you're able to select different funding sources you want to look at from this perspective. And then the tool will spit out three interesting insights. One is the inflation piece. I just showed you that. The other is, what is the steady state spend rate that you need to hit to be able to finish the recovery by your assigned target date? And then the third insight that spits out is, what's the rough number of construction jobs required to execute on that level, that sort of speed of recovery? So in this case, $56 million per year would be the steady state spend rate needed from now until 2039. And in order to do that, you need 664 additional construction workers to execute on that work. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Devin in a second to do a live demo. Before I do that, let me just orient you on three use cases that we're going to explore and the features we're going to try to highlight. First is problem identification. So how do we use this tool to identify where there are problems, where projects are stuck, and start to point us towards solutions to get them going? Second is a county by county comparison. And the idea here is, how can this data and this tool provide greater transparency and a bit of accountability into recovery efforts? And then third is a long-term trajectory where we're looking at funding implications over the coming years. Okay, with that, Devin, I'm going to hand screen share over to you.
All right, sounds
And
good. Want to first of
yeah.
all, say, thanks everyone for attending. I'm Devin Tierney. I'm a research programmer here at RAND. Been here about 10 years. Most of my work focuses on disaster recovery and resilience. Worked on a number of projects related to Puerto Rico and other FEMA programs, which ultimately led into this tool that we'll walk through with a few examples now.
Okay, so we're going to do a couple of use cases to highlight these features. So first one, let's envision a scenario where there's a changeover in the administration at the state level. There's a new governor who's just sworn in. I'm the governor's chief of staff. It's my first week on the job, so I've got to get my head around this recovery. So I call up Devin, who's an analyst in the recovery office. All right, Devin, I'm a week into the job. Everyone's breathing down my neck about this recovery. What do I need to know?
Sure. So as a starting point here, we're at the PA projects dashboard, and I'll just mention there's a couple other dashboards that cover homepage and tutorials to walk through some of the information we just covered in some slides. From the PA projects dashboard here, you have everything, all of your data for the PA program hasn't been subsetted. So again, the map will show county by county. The total obligations right now is what's currently being shown. Color coordinated, and then to get an initial idea of where things are sitting, if you go down to the obligation disbursement chart here, which again, the y-axis is total dollars and x is time. Hovering over the farthest out point, we have just over $1.2 billion in total obligations and just under $500 million in disbursements.
Okay, so that tells me we're roughly 40% complete in this recovery. 40% of the obligated money has been spent out to do these recovery projects. We've got a long ways to go. So I have read in the newspaper that there are issues in the energy sector, that there's some challenges there. What can you tell me about that?
Sure. So to get into that, we step over to some of our filters here that we mentioned before, one of which is the sector. So if we select the energy sector here, that will subset the data to just projects that are associated with the energy sector. We'll keep all of the applicants that have projects that are associated with the energy sector and sort of subset everything down. So we can see the map changes to show where the energy related projects are. And then looking at the obligations and disbursements, there's about, in our example here, $150 million in total energy project obligations. And of that, $45 million has been dispersed.
Okay, so this confirms our suspicion that the energy sector is lagging behind, right? The overall disaster is 40% complete. This tells us the energy sector is 30% complete. So help me understand what's going on. Why is the energy sector lagging?
So from here, we can look at our applicant table on the top, which lists, so these are all applicants and then their total obligations of energy sector projects. We can see there's two that are relatively large comparatively to the rest, one of which has almost all of its funds dispersed, but actually the largest applicant here has nearly 0% disbursement. So we can click on that up here. That will subset down to the energy projects for this example, applicant 79. And when that comes up, we can again see the counties where those projects are located in, and there are 7 energy projects under this applicant. To really actually just one here. So this is our example project that is 1611. It's just over $25 million and has been nearly 0% dispersed. So it seems to be a likely culprit of that difference between overall recovery and recovery in the energy sector here.
And I can see from the disbursement and obligation graph, where they received that large obligation in mid-2023. It's been roughly 2 years, and we've seen no movement on the disbursement side of that. So that implies to me they haven't made any real progress on that particular recovery project. Okay, so we're getting closer. Let's zoom in further. What else can you tell me about this?
Okay, to step to another level of detail, we can go from the projects down to the damages here. So that's the next dashboard we'll jump over to here. I've previously selected the energy sector here just to start at the same point. And our applicant name, which we just identified, was applicant 79. So pull that up real quick to see which damages were in those 7 energy projects of this particular applicant that seems to have some sort of slowdown. So when that's pulled up, we can see there's 7 projects and 12 damages across these projects. A project might have 1 or multiple damages. The top right chart, which is again going to show the status of these damages and their quarterly progress reports. So we have on the y-axis number of damages, we have 12 total damages. And then from Q4 of 2021 through Q1 of 2025, we can see there is progress being made. But let's zoom in back to our project 1611, which is this project with $25 million. And it has 2 damages, but one of them has really been zeroed out for whatever reason. So let's go into this specific damage that makes up most of this project. And then looking at the status over time, so it was in pre-obligation, and we can see it entered planning, design, was in permitting, and then dropped back to planning, went through that for 2 quarters, back to design, and now it's back in permitting again. So this allows you to at least see, it looks like something is holding us up with permitting potentially. It allows you to go out to stakeholders and try to start a discussion to see what the issue is here and if it can be resolved and what might be causing this slowdown or this project moving back and forth in this implementation.
Okay, thank you. So this sort of wraps up our first use case. Let me just highlight a few pieces out of this. One was in 3 to 5 minutes, we went from the billion-dollar view to narrowing in on a sector, to identifying an applicant that seemed to be an issue, from there to a project, and from there to a damage. So that's that scalable insight I mentioned at the beginning. We can start big picture, but zoom in to a pretty fine level of detail very easily and very quickly. So this use case highlights what we call problem identification, using the tool to find your problems. Tools can't fix your problems, right? This tool will not go out and solve the permit issue for this particular project. But if in this scenario, I'm the governor's chief of staff, well, I know who to call and figure out what's going on and how to fix it. So problem identification and scalable insights was the two things we were looking to highlight there. Second thing I want to point out is this pattern of backwards movement. We're showing it for one project here, but we've seen this play out across hundreds, sometimes thousands of projects. And this just destroys progress. It really can slow down a recovery. So if any of you are in the audience right now are working a disaster, I would encourage you to look for this pattern where projects are going back and forth through process steps. If you see that at scale, I mean, dozens or hundreds of projects following this pattern, then I can pretty much guarantee that that is the number one reason your recovery is going slower than you would like it to. We call this phenomenon chutes and ladders. For those of you who are familiar with the board game, that should resonate. 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. So a reasonable question would be, why do projects move backwards through these process steps? It varies, of course. There's lots of reasons. One of the common ones that we see is when a project goes out to bid, you've got a certain budget in mind, you've got a certain dollar grant from FEMA to fund that project. But if all of the bids come back at a higher dollar value than that, then either you're going backwards in the process to design, so you can figure out, well, can I tweak the design to get this to fit within budget? Or am I going back to planning to figure out where to find more money to fund this project? Okay, that wraps up use case one. Use case two. So in this scenario, I am in the state recovery office. Our office has overall responsibility for the recovery. I'm headed into meetings with county executives from Elk and Clearfield counties. So I want to show up prepared. I don't know anything going in, so Devin, arm me with some data and some insights.
Sure. So stepping back to where we started originally, so these two counties we just mentioned, Elk and Clearfield, are actually right next to each other. They're handling a similar number of projects, but a large difference in the total dollars associated with those projects. So I was just showing the map, how we sort of selected them. Jumping now into the municipality or county comparison dashboard here, it's going to show similar information to the PA project dashboard. You can select a county, two counties to compare on the left and right. We've selected Elk and Clearfield. And again, so Elk in this example case has 161 projects. Clearfield has 156 projects. And then the two bottom charts here, again, show obligations and disbursements. Just want to note that the y-axis is actually different on these two. So Elk County is managing about $18 million in obligations, and of that, just over 8 million has been dispersed. Meanwhile, Clearfield is managing just about $10 million in obligations, and of that, just over 2.5 million has been dispersed. So same number of projects, different number of total dollar values among those projects, and different rates of disbursement to date between these two counties that are neighbors.
So this tells us Elk County is about 44% spin out. So they're doing pretty well. They're actually ahead of the overall disaster. Clearfield is about 25% out. So they are lagging significantly. And as Devin said, they've got a similar number of projects, but actually Elk County in this scenario is managing a greater number of dollars. So if I'm in the state recovery office and I'm headed into these meetings, I'm thinking about two things. One is I want to try to extract some lessons learned from Elk County. Right? They seem to be doing pretty good. What can we learn from them that we can share with others? Second is when I'm heading to the meeting with Clearfield, of course, I'm going to share those lessons that I get from Elk County, but I'm also going to use this to try to enforce a little bit of accountability on the recovery. They're dramatically underperforming. This tool gives us the transparency to show that. And so we need to have a tough conversation. And I'll be thinking about what are the carrots and the sticks I have to help get this moving forward for this particular county. Okay, and I'll also say we could do the same exercise we did in the last use case where we'd comb through the applicant list and the project list and try to understand, are there any big culprits that are holding back Clearfield County? And we could drill down and try to get some answers to that question. We won't do that here for the sake of time. So that wraps up use case 2. Now moving on to 3. So in this scenario, I am in the budget office. We're developing our 5-year plan. I need to understand how much of the state budget do I need to set aside for recovery activities in the coming years. And I'm going to steer you on this one, Devin. So right now we've got the end date defaulted to 2039. I think that's way too long, and I want to pull that back to 2032.
All right. So to do that, again, we have three adjusters in this dashboard. One is the end date of your recovery scenario. Second is the assumed inflation rate over that time. And then just to mention, there's an HMGP project dashboard similar to PA projects. We kind of went through that. This data behind here has both PA and HMGP funds in this example. So you could select just PA or just HMGP or even a subset of PA if you don't want to look at permanent work or any other really subset of data. So anyhow, moving this back to 2033, did you say, Kyle?
I want 2032, please.
32. Okay, so you can see as we move back in time, the charts are adjusting to account for that new completion scenario, and the slope, the rate of your disbursement is going to need to change to match the planned recovery scenario here. So now we're at 2032. Now we are, and we can look at what that annual disbursement looks like.
Yeah, I'll talk about the disbursements there. And then while I'm doing that, maybe pull historically, I think inflation in the construction sector has been roughly 2.5%. So maybe pull that back. I think that's a reasonable projection going forward. So why did I choose 2032? I think that's a reasonable baseline for this recovery. And the reason I say that is I'm looking at the spend rate in the last couple of years, and it's the slope of the orange line. Around 2022, 23, 24. And if we select 2032, it's kind of a comparable slope coming out of the actual data we have versus the projected. So I think 2032 is a reasonable baseline. And in a second, we'll explore what it looks like to go faster than that. So the 3 insights this spits out for us. One is the inflation, the money lost to inflation. Out of that 1.2 billion in total obligations, we've got 425 million lost to inflation. That is a painful number. It's very significant. I think often underappreciated in these long-running disasters, how significant that can become. So a reasonable next question is, well, who pays for that $426 million? And there's really 3 different answers to that. One is FEMA, of course, knows about inflation. They account for it in their cost estimates when they're writing the grants for these public assistance projects. And so one answer is that could all be fully baked in to the initial project grants that are coming out. And if that's the case, then it's covered. Me in the scenario as a official in the budget office doesn't need to worry about that. If, however, that 426 million is greater than what was baked in those initial cost estimates, well, then it's a question of what's the funding mechanism that was used on these grants. If it was 406, then FEMA pays those costs if there's any overruns due to inflation. If it's 428, then the applicant pays those costs if there's any overruns. I recognize I have not defined those terms. My guess is a lot of you in the audience know 406 versus 428. I'm not going to kind of go down that rabbit hole, but the point here is you could use this dashboard along with knowledge of your funding sources to start to understand what are you on the hook for as an applicant versus what is FEMA on the hook for. All right, two other insights that come out of this. One is that steady state spend rate is 112 million. Sorry, it's somewhat fine print on the side there. So in order to finish by 2032, going forward, we need to maintain at least 112 million per year in disbursements. In order to execute that work, we're going to need 850 construction workers. So, all right, that's our baseline. Now, Devin, let's see if we can do a little better and pull this up to 2029. So accelerate by 3 years.
Okay, so we'll adjust that first filter up here from 2032, and we'll move back to 2029, see how things change.
Okay, so you can see how much that orange line, the slope of that increased. So we've got to dramatically pick up the pace of work to the tune of almost 200 million per year, as opposed to, I think it was 125 in the last one. So that could be aggressive, right? That could be challenging. The upside of that is we would save almost 43 million in inflation. So that inflation number came down quite a bit as we accelerate the recovery. You've got the opportunity to save 43 million. Certainly that is appealing, but you have to balance that against how realistic is it that you can surge 1,500 additional construction workers to do that work. In some scenarios, that's great. You know, that's a good jobs program for the state. In other places, you'd be looking at bringing in workers from neighboring states. Okay, I think that wraps up the third use case. So let me just do a quick summary, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Jesse. In the 3 use cases we highlighted here, first one, we focused on problem identification and this idea of zooming out and zooming in based on your needs. Second one, we illustrated how the tool can add transparency and accountability into a recovery. And third one is how to use this tool for forward-looking planning. Those are 3 use cases. There are many more, but cognizant of time, I'm going to end it there and turn it back over to Jesse.
Thank you, Kyle and Devin. As I'm sure many of our audience members are aware, managing a disaster recovery can be a massive challenge no matter the size and scope of the damage. And the tool was initially developed to support a large-scale effort in Puerto Rico, but as Kyle and Devin mentioned earlier, it is easily scalable to track recovery progress at regional, state, or county levels, or even by a specific sector or funding source. So we recognize that no tool or framework will ever make disaster recovery efforts easy, but we're hopeful that this tool may make some pieces of it easier. We do have some questions coming in to the chat, so we'll transition to the Q&A part of today's program. So there was one question. What is the data source feeding the dashboard?
Devin, I think that's a you question.
Sure. So in our example here, we're showing FEMA PA, and FEMA HMGP data, which reflect, so it's the same exact structure as what's in Grants Manager right now. In the version of the tool that sort of has real data, it has that in addition to HUD funds from the CDBG block grant. And then any other funds that have at least a level of detail of either the county or the project or location, lat-long coordinates, we can kind of incorporate into this. In this example here, though, this is PA and HMGP data, and the structures exactly mirrored of what's in Grants Manager, if you are familiar with that at all.
And Devin, maybe mention the quarterly progress reports as well.
Yeah, sure. So those are also, so those come in at the damage level, and basically the data source, everything's linked. So each damage is linked to a project, each project's linked to an applicant, and then all of the associated characteristics, whether it's of, the type of project or the actual coordinates of a damage, it's all interactive, and so can sort of talk to each other there. And the quarterly progress reports, those are, as the name implies, come in every quarter, and it's for each damage basically for the actual implementation, where is it in that stage of planning, design, permitting, construction? And that's where we can see that back and forth action sometimes where something may move up through permitting or even construction and then steps back in next quarter for a multitude of reasons.
Okay. Is there any value with this tool for counties, or is it more focused for the state level?
My sense on this is if you're managing a disaster and you feel like you don't have good visibility on it, this tool can help with that. If it's a small enough disaster, not so many projects, you're not juggling so many funding sources, and you feel like you can have it on a spreadsheet or whatever tool you have is adequate, and you feel like you can get your arms around that disaster, you understand it, things aren't falling through the cracks, then maybe this isn't the right solution.
And I'll just add in here that the example we're showing is Pennsylvania and then basically being able to narrow down to a single county. But there's nothing that limits the structure of this from, say, if I live in Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, the tool could be the top level is Allegheny County, and the next level, everything that's highlighted out is the 300 or so municipalities within the county. So same sort of actions, but it's just which geographic scale do you want to start and get down to, really?
The flip side of that would be COVID, which was a nationwide disaster. We could scale this up and track something like that. So
Okay.
quite flexible in that way.
Is the data a direct download from grants portal on a nightly basis?
So the real data, and again, this is sort of dummy data made up. So it has the same structure as Grants Manager. And the tool itself, we have right now it's a weekly update schedule, could be changed to daily, but it pulls directly from Grants Manager, goes into a couple of cleaning scripts to make sure things align and look for there's certain issues that come up with the data there, typos and things like that. But it's an automated process. So it's basically a scraper, pulls it in, goes to processing scripts, and spits it out into the database used by the tool.
Okay. Can the user add their own data, thinking of communities that may be pursuing non-FEMA funding sources?
Yeah, overall, we've tried to make this very flexible. So a user would have to be somewhat savvy and database organization and some scripting, or you could partner with us to do whatever customizations make sense for you. But the overall idea here is we built this platform and you could easily change geographic scope, change the funding sources you're tracking, change even projects for that matter that you're tracking. So the short answer is yes, it takes a little bit of work, and whether that's on your side or on our side, we're happy to talk about that.
Okay. How would a state get access to the tool?
Talk to us. So yeah, we are eager to, we think there's great value in this. We developed it for Puerto Rico, as Jesse had mentioned, but we think this could improve the efficiency of recoveries. We are excited by the prospect of this being used elsewhere. And we also think that now we've sort of built the foundation of this, it's reasonably easy to tailor it to others' distinct needs. So please reach out to us if you're interested.
Okay. Someone is asking how to access the data concerning Puerto Rico's cases.
You cut out a little bit. Repeat that one more time, Jesse.
Someone is interested in accessing the data concerning Puerto Rico with the idea that the community leaders and ordinary citizens could verify what is in the tool.
Yeah. So at the moment, we've delivered the tool to our government sponsors in Puerto Rico, and they have the ultimate say-so on broader access. If you ping me by email, I can run this by our sponsor and see if we can get a broader set of folks with access to it.
And I'll just add in there that there, depending on the data set, there's obviously gonna be some sensitivities. Some fields that might not be able to include it. For Puerto Rico specifically, though, they do have a public transparency portal that has much of this data, the same sort of stuff, some project characteristics and applicant level data that you can view publicly. We can definitely get you the link if you'd like.
Devin.
Okay. Let's see, another. Sometimes there's a proper sequence for doing projects. For example, you don't want to repave the road if you are going to tear it up later for water lines. Are such relationships across projects something that could be added to the tool?
First of all, I love this question. Just a week, 2 weeks ago, I was in Oakland, California, and my uncle was driving me through his neighborhood and said, after 20 years, they finally repaved this road. And a week later, the water company came and tore it all up again. And you hear these examples just again and again and again. And it's so frustrating. So, yeah, I love the intent here. And it's something we've thought about as a project, is not currently incorporated into the tool. And I'd have to think harder about how we could do that. But Devin, if you have any immediate thoughts on this, please jump in.
Yeah, there's nothing that would stop us from doing that. Basically, the way, just thinking about it for 3 seconds. Again, the data is set up where it's all damages, and they're associated with the table of projects, and they're associated with the table of applicants and the associated info with each one of those. There's nothing that would stop you from adding more fields or columns. So for instance, if you wanted to add a field to the project table or database that sort of had a sequence number of like every project that's number 2, first a number 1 project has to occur before that, maybe within a single applicant. But all that's to say, there's whatever the method is, there's definitely ways that you could add that functionality in.
Okay. Here's an easy one. With all of the uncertainty in how disaster management will look going forward, how might that affect the uses or value of this tool?
Also a great question. We somewhat anticipated something along these lines. So yes, there is enormous uncertainty about what disaster management looks like in the coming years. But 2 things I know for certain. One is disasters will continue to happen. And 2 is someone is going to have to manage thousands of projects to recover from those disasters. So I think as long as those 2 things continue to be true, which I'm absolutely confident they will, then I think this tool can be useful. The specifics might have to change, right? If public assistance turns into a block grant rather than its current structure, some of the details would show up a little different on the tool. But again, given it's quite flexible, that's a very minor adjustment on our side.
Okay. Could you talk a bit about how stakeholder feedback shaped the tool's features?
Devin, put that one to
Sure.
you.
Yeah, so when we were developing this, we sort of used like an agile methodology, if anyone's familiar with that, where sort of, you build a bicycle before you build a car. So this went through a few different iterations, and we built in some of the different visuals that we're seeing and other functionalities and sort of dashboards we didn't get into here, based directly on stakeholder feedback. So since this is a flexible setup here, we can edit or drop things that are in here or add new ones, and it's a relatively streamlined process. Since the data is all there, it's really just if you want to change a little bit how you're looking at it, there's a lot of flexibility, and we just had constant conversations with our stakeholders in the real version of this tool to sort of set up the outline and what we'd like to see before creating the example version here.
Okay. What were some of the challenges that you faced in developing the tool? And if you had the benefit of hindsight, is there anything you would do differently in developing the tool?
It's a good question. So I think some of the challenges with any large data sets is there's going to be messy data issues, especially if some of the stuff that feeds in this might be hand collected Excel sheets. So you might have typos of applicant IDs or numbers or project sort of identification characteristics. That's a challenge. It's it takes a little bit of time to solve. I think the other challenge that we encountered was starting out and trying to include like 12 different funding sources from the get-go before, really getting one down and then expanding it out from there. It can be a challenge depending on the level of detail the different funding sources include with the grants that they put out. So something like PA and HMGP are pretty similar. CDBG also kind of similar. They operate at like a project level, but other grant programs might not be specific to infrastructure. They might not have a single point where money's directly going, might be more of a block grant thing. You can incorporate that, but it's more just making sure you really understand the format of the grant data that you want to fold into this if you're expanding it out. That's definitely one of the challenges that we ran into.
Okay. Anything you would do differently if you had the opportunity to do it all over again?
Probably a few things, but I'm not sure right now off the top.
Okay.
Well, just you did mention something in your first spiel there, Devin, which was start small and grow. We did try to just go straight after 12 different funding sources, build them into the tool right from the get-go, and it got pretty messy pretty quick.
Okay. There are a couple of other questions that have come in. One is asking about would there be a way to add a feature where citizens can notify or provide comments about the recovery activities and how they're handled during the process?
Yeah, I don't see why not. So sort of a public feedback loop to incorporate. Yeah, I mean, I think my initial thought is the dashboard or the page for that would look fairly different than what we showed today. But the nice thing about the tools we use to build all of this is they're pretty flexible. And so, yeah, you could have a public facing site with drop-down menus where people could select, I'm in this county and I want to, complain about this project or something of that sort. You could have free text and you could have all that sort of piped to appropriate office to analyze it and try to do something about it. So yeah, that seems quite doable as my first take.
Yeah, I would just add one thing that we're not showing here that we do have is the individual lat long coordinates of all of the projects and damages. So, if you had a dashboard that showed that, you could, as a user, zoom into your specific area, see the actual dots of things that are going on, select the one that's next to you, and basically, have your feedback, and then that would be linked to the actual damage that's at that location.
Sounds powerful. So disaster recovery is multidimensional. Obviously, dollars alone can miss other measures of progress on the ground. Are there other existing databases such as, Bureau of Labor Statistics or real estate data, or other data sources that might be integrated with this tool to provide a broader picture of the recovery?
Yeah, good question, good point. So the scenario dashboard does have quite a bit of other data in the background. So the jobs number, for example. So just a refresher on that. So right, we could set the target end date from the recovery, That would dictate what's the steady state spend rate you need to get there. And then from there, we calculated how many construction jobs are required to do that work. And there, it just shows up on this tool as one number, but behind that one number, there's a ton of work and data that went into that. And so we definitely incorporated BLS data there. And then with inflation analysis, same, there's quite a bit of work behind that as well. I think that sort of gets at your question, but my sense is you're also kind of interested in is what other data sources could paint a broader picture of how the recovery is going. And we didn't show it today, but our tool that we delivered to Puerto Rico has what we call quality of life dashboards. So for each of the sectors that we looked at, so energy, healthcare, education, public safety, et cetera, we asked our team leads, what are the most useful, simple metrics that you'd want to look at to know, is this sector moving in the right direction or the wrong direction? And so and what's the data source to measure that? And so in the tool, we have a series of dashboards that would paint that picture. So for energy, for example, it's, well, what's the price of energy on a per kilowatt basis, and some outage metrics, like how frequently is power going out is a big deal. For education, healthcare, they similarly came up with 2 or 3 metrics and data sources to feed into that.
All right, thank you, Kyle. Looking forward, what would be a logical next step for the tool? Would it be to add some of this additional functionality? Something else? What do you see as a logical next step?
I think broader use. I mean, by no means is this perfect, by no means is this complete, but we feel like we've reached minimum viable product that can add significant value to a recovery. So yes, I'm sure we could add many features, but I think the key thing now is, can we get folks to use it and hopefully demonstrate its value, and then from that use, we could take feedback and refine it. Because there is a risk to adding features, which is one of the things we like about this tool, is it's pretty simple and pretty easy to use. Just an example of that, when we were running through our quality assurance checks, we gave it to 3 or 4 people who had never touched it, weren't involved with the development, and gave them a handful of questions to answer. And they were all able to very quickly get oriented with the tool, use it, and answer these questions. So there's value in simplicity, and there is risk of adding too many additional features.
Okay. Well, I want to thank the presenters. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Devin, for giving us this overview and introducing the community to this really valuable, useful tool. And thank you all for dialing in. There were a handful of questions that we did not get to, but we will provide answers via follow-up. And if you have questions, please email the HSRD alias, and that is available at the RAND website. So thank you all very much. Hope you have a good weekend and take care.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks all.